Welcome to Leaders of Today. My guest is Maria Natapov, a step parenting and co-parenting expert. She's a trusted advisor to divorce professionals and the vice chair of the Sparrow Collective. Maria's teenage years were marked by disconnection from her voice, shaped by stay small, stay quiet messages that kept her people-pleasing and doubting herself. Now she channels that experience into helping parents and step-parents build emotionally safe homes where kids can grow up with confidence, connection, and clarity. Using her BH2O methodology and rapid resolution sessions, Maria supports families in moving from chaos to harmony, breaking the cycles she wishes she could have escaped as a teen. You're listening to Today's Leaders, From Teens to Titans. Hi, I'm Lorraine Connell, a teen leadership coach. I transitioned from teaching chemistry to coaching teens in leadership, helping them realize they can do hard things. We've often believed that leadership is an innate trait, but it's actually a skill that you build and improve. On this show, you'll meet today's leaders who share their teenage experiences, revealing how they developed confidence, direction, and the tools to become the leaders they are now. You'll discover how you or the teens in your life have the potential to become confident leaders, even if it doesn't seem possible. Welcome, Maria. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I think we often hear about leadership in the context of large movements, right? Large things, maybe global events or politics or, right, like these major kind of phenomenons. But I think it's so incredible. And what I've been discovering more recently and distinguishing for myself is this concept of personal leadership. And how, like it or not, that we basically are always in leadership. So it's like we may as well have a better understanding of what that means and the impact we're creating so that we can do so by design rather than by default.
Oh, I love that so much. Okay, so I start by asking all of my guests to take a trip down memory lane, go back to being a teenager, and share some of your experiences as a teenager and how they shaped you and molded you into the leader you are today, doing the work that you are doing.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that question. So my experiences in my around mid-teens, I was sort of in a unique position. I would say I was a lot more naive and really young at that age, younger than probably a lot of my peers were, because I was just really coddled. There's a lot of fear when we immigrated to this country when I was 8 years old. So I was sort of kept in this really careful bubble, right? Because at that point, my dad had left. He had left shortly after we moved. My mom was trying to get on her feet and support the four of us, myself, her, and my maternal grandparents. So really, my maternal grandparents were raising me. And they were older, and it was really hard for them to wrap their minds around this new culture and to gain an understanding of what was safe and what was not. So their answer to that was like, keep her busy and keep her at home. And so largely the way that was done is through food and through a lot of engaged activities like doing piano and then just sort of like prioritizing schoolwork because that was their capacity at that time. And so I think, again, being so young, so naive, so coddled, coming from that and having all this attention on me by these well-intentioned people, and then going into my first real romantic relationship with my former husband, it was a huge transition for me. And also back then, we didn't talk about what were healthy communication patterns and dynamics and what does that look like and how to self-advocate and all these things that we now talk about, especially in this context. So I also didn't fully realize how just my cultural dynamics and family dynamics of my personal family impacted me at that time. So since then, I've learned and realized and connected the dots on it was a culture of elders knew best, and it's possible because I was a female, so I'm not entirely sure what the experience is like for males, but It was very much put your head down, obey. And so I think that was another piece that contributed to me going into a relationship that was emotionally and physically abusive, controlling, etc. And so there was kind of grooming, as there is with coercive control and type of, narcissistic type of personalities and dynamics. And for me, the very well intention of my family to keep me safe with these tactics, right? Like, to me, that was a natural fit. I didn't realize that somebody could be utilizing them and actually controlling me. I was young, and all of that takes a while to make sense of. So that's really how I got there, and I had to really at some point in my journey take responsibility for that in order to set myself up for better outcomes. So understanding that piece, connecting those dots was really important. And I realized also that I was a highly emotional child, which I didn't know for many years. So that was a struggle. And so for me, the way that my voice was taken away and the way that I was guided, it just didn't work for me. And that level of oppression, and it's almost no surprise because the whole country was oppressive. That was why we left, right? So if I think about these things, I also have to consider the systems within which they existed. So it's interesting. I also have realized that oftentimes when we are faced with oppression, it's an external voice, but eventually over time it becomes an internal voice. So it's very much what happened. So in a sense, I can almost see how that may have played out for my parents as well, my grandparents, my parents. So it's not, again, that it was done intentionally. It was just, that was all they knew. And I had to realize that, again, some of that was what cut off my understanding and awareness of my intuition, right? And so then I also stopped kind of totally trusting my instincts and my judgment when it came to other relationships or navigating certain situations. And I remember distinctly having this feeling as I lived under this, shall I say, a cloud of naivete, where I had these strong instincts and I was like, I don't know what it is. There's just something off about either this person or this particular situation. I don't like it, but I'd go against my judgment because I had nothing to hold on to that felt substantial. And every time I was like, oh, I knew it. Why didn't I just listen? Like that's frustrating. And so again, these are just things I think to some degree you have to live through and allow yourself the space to grow into that and connect those dots and recognize how to navigate those things. But emotions were very much unprocessed in my family dynamic. There's lots of hot emotions, right? Like if you consider how Italian and Greek families are depicted, like very loving, but very intense and big personalities. And that was very much my upbringing, was among those kinds of folks. So being the baby of a baby, it felt difficult for me to find my footing. And because those emotions weren't processed, but I felt them so deeply, I always wanted to make sense of that. So for me, communication was really important, and also how to foster that sense of connection and mutual respect, even though I didn't even have language to understand that that's what I was after. And so I feel like largely all of that is what shaped me to yearn for the growth, the knowledge, the skills, the tools of how to understand all of that, make sense of it, heal myself, right? Utilize all that for myself, but also then in turn to support others in doing so. Because when I think of and take a look at not only what's happening in the world, but especially what's happening in North America, it's becoming pretty clear that I think we're all to some degree yearning for these skills and these conversations, but there's just not a lot of spaces where we can hold them and have them. We're not sure completely how to navigate them. And with how stretched thin we are, right, it's another ask. It's an additional kind of burden, for lack of a better word, to even create the time to do so. But I'm really committed to supporting the small ecosystem of the family, because I believe that there's a massive ripple effect when we are able to fine tune and create harmony in that space that extends well beyond our family unit.
Oh, 100%. I think that's so valuable. I mean, I have lots of questions and follow-ups from the things that you shared, but I do think you're spot on is when that family is stable, that family is able to communicate, that family has the skills that you're working on and building with them, the rest of the navigation becomes easier. But when our home base, right, our foundation is cracked and broken, you can't build on it. So I think it's really powerful how you phrase that is like, you nurture, you create, you build in that family ecosystem. And then from there, we can spread our ways out. And I love that because so many of us are hurting. And if we could just recenter what we value in our families, then maybe everything that we value in the world will follow suit.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a firm believer of that.
So my first question is, I think there's probably a lot of your voice being silenced and all of that, like based on the culture that you were born into, but then moving into a culture that you didn't quote unquote belong to and trying to fit in and normalize. And, you said that your maternal grandparents were trying to do that with and for you. So talk a little bit about the culture in which you were born and raised up until 8 and how the immigration created your family to the point of like, okay, we've got to get out of here.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think it's also probably important to note that my parents had an extremely tumultuous relationship from probably before I was born. All my time with them, it was really chaotic. There's a lot of fighting.
Mm-hmm.
There are times that my dad would leave and then he would come back, and it just felt really unsettled. Luckily, there were also stretches during which I lived with my grandparents, and I think that was probably for the best, which I didn't, of course, realize as a child because all kids desperately want nothing but time with their parents. They want that attention and they want them to be the ones to be there or to do the thing, right? So I couldn't appreciate that for many years, unfortunately. But they definitely had a very loving home, very attentive home. And so I think retrospectively, that was largely what provided me with a foundation and structure, and probably to many degrees resilience, or allowed me to access resilience in the midst of all of that. And so basically the culture, it was very achievement oriented, and essentially probably the common caricature of like what we would call maybe a tiger mom, who just like super high expectations, almost perfectionistic kind of expectations. Nothing's ever good enough. And the thought process behind that is, oh, this is motivating you to be better, right? Not realizing it's just completely tearing you down and breaking you apart. Also, I would say the Russian culture, and again, I'm aware that these are just my own experiences. This may not necessarily be true for the entirety of the cultures. I want to put that caveat out there. But it was very possessive culture when it came to children. Children were viewed as possessions. So not only was my identity stifled, I wasn't really allowed to have one. And it wasn't like I get to earn that right. It's almost like when you get married, you're just passed off to that person. And it's kind of like you're now their responsibility. And so I think there's aspects of that, even though, again, my mom was very much encouraged. I was very much encouraged to be independent and stand on my own 2 feet. But there was that lurking in the background. And I think that's important to note because naturally that comes with strings. And my sense of the American culture, and again, understanding this is not necessarily the norm for everybody, but my sense from that outside, looking from the outside, right, which essentially was just like through just media, right, like all the messaging on TV and whatever I experienced at school, etc., was that kids were really, valued for their autonomy and encouraged to be autonomous and grow in that independent way, and that was something to strive for, right? The notion of launching, right? Or flying the coop, if you will. And also, it felt like the voice was really respected of the child and encouraging the development of that and really allowing them to have a lot of say in what their needs are or what kind of activities or courses they are drawn to, right? So lots of support in them finding their own way and developing that and fostering that and encouraging that. So very different, right? I mean, almost completely on the opposite ends of the spectrum between these two views.
Yeah, it's sort of like the evolution of the culture and how the culture shaped your experience as a new American, sort of not feeling like you belonged in America because you didn't grow up here, but how the culture from moving from one culture into another translated for your family.
It's hard to say completely how it was for my family. I mean, we were very close. So I think that definitely helped, right? Whenever you have a very, very strong bond and kind of your tribe, that always makes things easier, right? Especially when you're going through hardships.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're already part of something bigger. You're part of my advocacy team. Leaders of Today and Peers Not Fears exist to amplify voices at the age when so many of us were having moments that shaped who we became, sometimes in silence, sometimes without support. These conversations are about what happens when voices are heard earlier, when leadership is named, and when young people are reminded that they matter. As we move from building these programs to sharing them more widely, my ask is simple. Help us carry these stories forward. Share an episode, talk about the work, pass it along to someone who works with youth, supports teens, or believes in the power of early leadership. Because when we normalize telling these stories and believing in young voices, we don't just change individual lives, we change what's possible.
But I will say, I think it gave me a really unique perspective, because what I realized later in life commonly happens is when the views of the family are embedded in the cultural views of the land or the place, sometimes there's this interesting like overlay that happens. And so it's difficult to distinguish what is what, right? What is specifically to the family and versus what is specific to the culture, and where are those moments for potentially interventions or another choice. Where I had the value of seeing both. And for me, literally, I would set foot home and it was like we were back in Russia, kind of in this capsule, right? In this time capsule.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I was awarded the luxury of noticing those points of intervention and choice. And so I think that allowed me to have a richer understanding and to distinguish from that, okay, what do I want to create? What do I agree with? What resonates for me? And which way do I want to move forward? So I'm very, very blessed in that way. As much as, yes, it had its challenges, I think that is such an incredible opportunity that I was awarded that many are not. And I can imagine how much more difficult it is when all of that is sort of collapsed and you're just feeling like you're under the weight of it and maybe feeling like it's not you. And yet you are not sure how to move forward, how to move beyond it, and how to, in a way without offending others, just simply be true to yourself and what might resonate for you as far as values or what you want to prioritize in your experience of life or maybe family or your interactions with others.
That's really a fascinating way to look at it. I think it's so nice to hear that this is the reason for this podcast, is really to see the gems that were given as young people and how we utilize them in our future years as leaders. And you seeing this opportunity where you could see side by side interventions and ways around the culture that was still potentially oppressive in your home. And maybe you didn't have the opportunity to do anything about it at that point, but now you're able to see and reflect and create opportunities for others and families to navigate that side-by-side sort of observation. I think that's really, really cool. You made a statement about in the Russian culture that like children are seen as possessions. And I wanted to clarify, are both genders seen as possessions or more so the women? Because you said they sort of like pass them off in marriage. And I know very, very well in most cultures, women are passed along in marriage. But is that the same for the male gender as well in your culture?
Again, it's a little tricky for me to say because I didn't grow up
Because
with
you're in.
brothers or even close cousins who are of another gender, or even like close friends of the family, which they may have been close. Like my parents might know more, but I don't think I had that view because as a kid, it just doesn't occur to you, right? Like to compare the
Right.
stories. So in a sense,
Right.
I wish I could go back and pay more attention perhaps, or have those conversations. But what I will say is I remember when I was a kid, there was a point at which my mom and I were really butting heads. And I ended up seeing a psychiatrist, a Russian psychiatrist. And he was the one to share with her that oftentimes in Russian culture, kids are seen as possessions, whereas in America, that is not the way. And that essentially it would be valuable to explore embracing more or having more of this new quote unquote way of looking at things present in our dynamic, or at least starting to kind of get curious and start to foster some of that. As far as the boys, obviously they're not passed off, but it's interesting, right? I think just in general, societally, we often assign different roles to men and women, right? Or at least historically we have. I think maybe now there's more opportunity to be a little more fluid in some of that, but historically we've looked at things through those kinds of lenses.
In your relationship with your former husband, and you are currently a step parent, so you have then remarried. So let's talk a little bit about the culture of finding the first husband and how that impacted your relationship with him. And did you guys have children? And how is all this showing up in the work that you're doing with parents and co-parents?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. So as far as how it's showing up, I've lived it on all sides. So my early childhood set me up for this relationship that was, as I mentioned, not healthy. We did not have children. I stayed way too long. It probably was one I shouldn't have entered into, unfortunately. And my mom pointed this out to me, but she did it in such a way that it like just drew me closer to the person. But I will say I've distinguished the core need. And I mentioned this tiger mom mentality of like, we're just going to break you down because we think that's the way to motivate you to do better. Well, what it actually did is not only did it, I think, help to normalize that way of breaking me down, that is, to a degree. And of course, I again, wouldn't have consciously agreed with that back then. But essentially what was happening, I think, is I was getting the message of this is how you show love. This is normal. So when that was happening, it wasn't like, oh, this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel like how I know love feels. It was like, this is normal. And I think it also set me up to yearn for support no matter what, because I didn't have it. So that became the top need, like the affirmation, somebody who's just like a diehard fan of mine and supports me. And so even though there were really terrible moments, because that was there and that need trumped everything else, that became like the number one priority. And it actually kind of drove a rift between my family and me, which was really hard and heartbreaking for me. I'm a loyal person, and that felt like a betrayal of sorts, and I had a lot of conflicted emotions around it. But I also found at that point I couldn't find a way to resolve it. So maybe hopefully that just helps somebody else who's experiencing any and all of the above of what I just mentioned to kind of have a new perspective of it's not something you're going to see right away, but that is lurking in the background. And so maybe there's an opportunity to approach it differently. But so for me, that was one of the reasons I stayed, I think, for so long. And then at one point I had to wake up to the reality of this is really making me sick. Like the relationship was starting to actually make me physically ill. And at that point, I had to realize like, okay, as much as I hate to do this, I have to at least take a break from it, if not end it altogether. And so, but it took a long time to realize that. And I only realized it with the help of a therapist because my ex had substance abuse challenges. And so when I found him a day program, it was at an exit interview with a social worker that I discovered that we had like an enmeshed relationship and there's codependency and all kinds of things, and that I didn't even realize I was enabling him, like just all the things. So yeah, I felt very blindsided when I learned that because I thought of myself as somebody who always, again, pulled this information towards myself because I just found it fascinating and it was something I really yearned to understand more of. And so to find out that I essentially created myself as a statistic, right, without realizing it, just blew my mind. Yeah, so there was denial, there was shock, and it took a while to fully wrap my mind around that and then to take the steps necessary to start to untangle myself from that relationship and not get caught up in, well, I guess I'm going to be single for the rest of my life, because that was an all dominating thought for a while too. And then I met my husband after we broke up, and he had a daughter. So I spent a good amount of time convincing him that I need to be his one woman because he needs a better role model for his daughter. And he wouldn't listen. And he was of the opinion that because of everything I had experienced, I was better positioned to be a parental figure role than I was giving myself credit for. So we ended up going forward with our relationship. And me meeting my then stepdaughter was the make or break. If it was going to go well, we're going to go forward. If not, that was going to be the end of the road for us. So it went really well. And I became a step parent for 5 years. And then she revealed that she was being neglected and abused by her bio mom and stepdad, and came to live with us full time. So I was holding space for being a parent, like basically a mother figure overnight, but not being her mother, and leaving room for everything that comes with that, right? The parent who's like always present and not physically there. And they tried family therapy and it didn't work out. And my kiddo chose to not have any contact. And then years later, she wanted me to adopt her. So I did that a year and a half ago. So I'm now her mom legally. And it's an interesting thing because like I love it and I'm honored, of course, and it's remarkable and we have an amazing relationship. And at the same time, no legal piece of paper is going to cut that tie, right? So it's not so clean. It's not so easy. It's quite complicated. And I want to allow space and room for all of that to unfold as it needs to. It has nothing to do with me. It's their journey. And I just want to make sure that I'm creating the space for it to happen the way that they wanted to.
So how do you enter a support system for a family? Is it typically I am becoming a parent of, or like an adult in the relationship with another adult and there's children? Like, what is sort of the process of how you become a resource for a family?
So I can really support families at all stages. I can support them when there's just simply conflict between the parents, right? It could be really anything. It could be one of them is a high-powered executive who's hardly ever home. Maybe even they own their own business. And perhaps, you know, when they are investing money, or either it's taking their time and energy from the family, or perhaps even financial resources from the family, can cause a lot of conflict. And conflict ultimately between parents significantly impacts the kids.
Yes.
Their emotional well-being, right? Their resiliency, their academic performance, their interpersonal relationships. I mean, a whole host of different ways that it's impacting their development, their well-being, really on all fronts. So I can support families going through that. I can also obviously support them if they're contemplating divorce, perhaps if they're in the messy middle of their divorce journey and things seem oftentimes at that point like they're going from bad to worse, which almost feels like that felt impossible, right? Like it couldn't get worse and suddenly it's worse. And then, of course, sometimes years later after the divorce is finalized and still they're realizing they need to co-parent, maybe even sometimes one of the parents might start to feel isolated and alienated from their children, or they're just really, really struggling to make decisions together, have effective communication around the kids. So I can definitely support them in that way too. Again, keeping the children's best interest at heart. I can also support families when they're building a new second family post-divorce, when they're rebuilding, when they have a new partner that they want to introduce to the kids, or perhaps they've already been introduced and now they want to integrate them more fully because they want to move forward and perhaps move in together or get married, etc. Now, parents are no longer just making decisions for themselves. They really need to ensure that they're factoring in their children's needs and abilities, meaning the capacity, right, that their kids have for some of these new people. And is this going to be workable? Is this going to be in alignment, right? Is this going to be a fit? I really support families in all of those different ways. There isn't, I wouldn't say, one specific way that I support them stronger than other ways. It's really what their needs are. And all I will simply say is I just really wish that the BH2O framework, which is what I mostly utilize in a lot of this work, I wish that it had existed, because I just think my husband and his former partner could have really used it. I think my parents could have really used it, right? Like there could have been so many benefits, so much more understanding and feeling so much more empowered and so much more workability in all of those dynamics that could have been formed.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that methodology so that, anybody listening, I did want to ask you to just briefly define the different terms of parenting. I think I know what they are, but I think just for everyone, like what is a co-parent versus a step-parent versus a adult in a life,
Yeah, thank you. So I think co-parents really are the biological parents. So whether they are married, whether they are getting divorced or post-divorce, they are co-parents. Sometimes people will also refer to the step-parent as a co-parent, but I think it is important to note that that relationship is different just because the capacity of what's available for the role that they can play is different. I made a lot of mistakes with that, unfortunately, when I was a step parent, because good intentions alone don't just automatically give you rights, right? It is really important to ensure that there is workability in that co-parenting relationship between the biological parents and that considerations are given to ensure that there is healthy communication and a flow of information between those two parties. And again, kids feel very deeply all of these nuances that I'm talking about. It might seem like they're doing great. Sadly, I can promise you they're often not. They're just holding it together, which are very different things.
Yeah, I guess my only last clarification is I'm marrying into a family with kids and a step parenting is maybe not the direction that the family wants to take on. And so how does a person navigate my own emotions versus my current or future spouse's emotions versus the co-parent emotion versus the children? Where is the level of priority of what comes first? I guess
that is a great question. And unfortunately, there's no one answer to it because every single situation is unique. Sometimes you'll even have a situation that on paper looks identical, but the reality is it's totally different because the culture of that family is different, right? The history is different. The personality types are different. Kids are at different developmental points, right? Like so many factors go into a lot of this. And that is really what I specialize in supporting people with. So, and that's, what you brought up are perfect examples because how do you navigate your own fears and emotions and feelings of perhaps isolation or whatever else there may be, which is so common to the step parenting role often. And then at the same time, how do you understand what are priorities of how to form these bonds with others, right? Understanding their needs, understanding what's perhaps expected or hoped for by them. And then how do you create something that feels within your own values, right? That you can live into. So as you very astutely pointed out, there's many, many, many aspects that get factored into all of that. And I can't say one is more important than the other. And it also depends on what day it is or maybe what moment it is. Right?
True.
Yeah. But building those systems, I would say, are exactly the type of support that I offer. And that is such a beautiful flow into what is the BH2O framework? Well,
yeah,
it's a true system for how co-parents or a step parent can prioritize ensuring the child's needs, but also such that they're in alignment with their own values that they are instilling in the child. So we start out with the why. Right? What is your why for this whole relationship, for this whole role? What do you want? And then what are your 3 to 5 values that you would like to instill in this child? So when it's co-parents, if we're working together with both of the co-parents, then we look at what are the shared values we want to instill. That way we have a mutual point of agreement that we're working from because that becomes our North Star. When I'm working one-on-one with co-parents or step-parents, then it's just their own values. And we explore how we can, from that, make all the other decisions. Are we upholding those values or are we unintentionally, which is so often the case, unfortunately, undermining those values? And we don't realize it. And so what do you need to be able to uphold them? What systems, what structures, what type of, right? What does your communication model look like? How do you respond to difficult situations and emotionally charged situations. And we build up your skill set, your awareness, and really we put in the reps just like you would at a gym.
Yeah.
With a lot of these emotionally oriented kind of challenges and opportunities so that you feel really solid and right, or at least that's what we're working towards, is you feeling really solid and empowered and clear on how to move forward in a way that you're not constantly relying on some third party person to settle your disputes.
Wow, that's really cool. And I can see how what you addressed is like this is really beneficial for co-parents who are currently married, co-parents who are in the middle of a divorce, co-parents who are divorced. Like it's the foundation, the system works anyway.
Absolutely.
Regardless.
And they drive it. I want to make it very clear. So even though there is a structured approach that we go through together, and it's my responsibility to create the guardrails and help you really perhaps dig deeper or identify, okay, like what else do we need to put in place to ensure this is successful and we get to those goals and we realize them. But what those goals are, how that happens, is guided entirely by the individuals that I'm working with. So right, because their values are their values. They may not be my values.
Right.
That's their choice. They get to make those decisions. So it is purely my job to support them in that. It isn't my job to direct them in how to do it.
That's so great. I love that. And so if people are interested in learning more or connecting with you, where do they find you?
Yeah, well, they can easily find me at synergistic.parenting.com. That's my website. There's several ways to get a hold of me. You can fill out a form on the website. You can email me directly. My phone number is there too. I'm also on LinkedIn at synergistic.parenting. I'm also on Facebook at Maria Natapov. And I've recently collaborated with Whitson Law. So I believe if you go to Whitson Law Firm, that's WHITSON lawfirm.com. You will see a tab there for BH2O. And if you click on that, then you'll see my contact info. And really, there's several opportunities. I always offer a free complimentary call. So I'm happy to do that. That does provide clarity for people just around their next best steps and what's available to them. I also, as of recently, offering a BH2O drop-in class. It's a really powerful way to dip your toe in and truly experience this work for yourself and walk away with something powerful. And it's only $50. And if you wanted to move forward with any sort of work, you could apply that cost to the cost of whatever program you sign up for. So I would strongly encourage anybody who's remotely curious to jump on that, because it will give you so much clarity and truly just give you so much value that you can instantly implement in your situation, whatever that is.
Do you want to share where the name BH2O came from?
Yeah, so I want to make it clear. I didn't create this program. I'm just certified in it.
Okay.
It was created by an attorney named Trina Knutson, who's absolutely incredible. BH2O, so BE stands for beryllium, which is a strong, resilient metal. And H2O stands for water, which is adaptable and fluid. And the idea is that you need both. You need the strength and resiliency, and you also need the fluidity and adaptability of water to have a strong co-parenting relationship dynamic.
Okay. I'm curious about her chemistry background because I was a chemistry teacher. So
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't almost be surprised because she's just such a lifelong learner who literally inhales books, no joke. She has such an extensive amount of experience in the family law space. She has probably taken every single co-parenting class, co-parenting curriculum, like any and everything around communication, conflict resolution, supporting parents through difficult challenges, alienation, supervision, everything and anything. She's an attorney. She's a guardian ad litem. And yeah, she's just truly phenomenal. And so this program very much came from lived experience of this is what parents need to actually create a shift to reduce conflict for the sake of themselves and their children.
That's awesome. I usually ask one final question, and that is, tell me what advice you would give to a teen who identifies with your story.
I would say listen inward, give yourself permission, create space. Even if you can't hear, just keep creating even like a small space of 2 to 5 minutes to just be somewhere by yourself and listen inward. And
I love
so
that.
you'll start to hear and things will open up and you'll be guided.
That's so powerful. Maria, thank you so much for today's conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing how my audience hears it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this space and thank you for what you're doing in the world.
Are you ready to help the young people in your life unlock their inner strength and step confidently into leadership? The new workbook from Peers Not Fears, Your Voice Matters, Uncovering Your Unique Leadership. It's designed to help teens see the leader in themselves, step by step. It's not just a workbook. It's the first step towards a ripple effect that could change lives. Let's turn today's teens into tomorrow's titans. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit from this conversation. Together, we can support our teens in building healthy, positive relationships and become leaders of tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Lorraine Connell, and this is Leaders of Today, Teens to Titans.